Welcome to this Autism Ontario webinar. My name is Matthew Lay, and as always, I will be your host. Today's webinar, Finding the Balance, Navigating Tension Between Intervention and Neurodiversity with Katy Albert and Jane Vincent. We're going to be covering a lot today, empowering through understanding, supporting neurodivergent individuals, and fostering collaboration to strengthen the partnership between autistic individuals receiving intervention and their caregiver. But before we get into all that good stuff, because we know you've been asking for more on this topic, I need to cover some housekeeping items. First off, opinions reflected in this webinar session are those of the speakers, presenters, and myself, and do not necessarily reflect Autism Ontario. Please note that Autism Ontario does not endorse any specific product, therapy, treatment, strategy, opinion, service, or individual. What we do, however, is endorse your right to information. Autism Ontario believes strongly that it's important to do your own research and make your own informed decisions, which is part of why you're here today, to learn more and part of what we aspire to do with these webinars. Now, with the aim of being inclusive, respectful, and representative of the many voices within our diverse community, we will use both identity-first and person-first referential language. We acknowledge that the use of language is rapidly evolving and will continue to be an ongoing discussion within the autism community. More information about Autism Ontario's language statement can be found in the resource section, which leads me to that jam-packed resource section. It's open on the console below the video. If you close it out, it's on the cloud on the left, and it's just jam-packed with helpful resources that help inform our conversation tonight, including the slide deck in both official languages. There's an infographic there, some articles, and a number of things that we'll be referencing as we go through. Before we leave, we want to ensure that you take the survey. The more feedback we get, the better we do with these. And if you're having any troubles, you can go ahead and click on the help icon, which has a number of troubleshooting items in there. But what you can also do is just drop any issues you're having in the Q&A, and we will look to get back with you. All right, that was a lot. And now I have to bring out our team, everyone that we are here to see. So I'd like to welcome to the floor, Katy and Jane. Guys, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thank you.
So I've gotten to know you a little bit over the period of time where we've been planning this, but I haven't really, I don't know if our audience all know you. So if I could ask, Katy, can you talk a little bit about what brings you to the Autism Ontario webinar desk tonight? What is it that you do, and why are we hearing from you tonight?
Sure. So I am a mental health counselor and coach at the Red Pass Center. I also do parent coaching through a separate private practice. And really, my focus in my clinical work is around making mental health interventions accessible for autistic people. So finding ways to take evidence-based interventions and deliver these interventions in a way that makes them more accessible to this community. I used to work at the Geneva Center for Autism and kind of ultimately noticed that there's a big gap between mental health and developmental services in the province. And so mental health became my area of interest. And my goal is really to help bridge the gap between those two services, because as we know, there is so much overlap between mental health and autism. So that's a little bit about what I do. And this is just something that I think about daily in my practice, and more as advocacy is increasing and we're hearing a lot more autistic voices. It's something that I am so excited to be talking more about. So thank you so much for creating a platform for us to have this discussion.
Well, we're excited to hear from you. I know our audience is. And when we speak about advocacy, Jane, you're listed as a self-advocate. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I've been interacting with the mental health community a little bit longer than I have with the autistic community. I'm late diagnosed, but I have been diagnosed with depression, anxiety, OCD since a very young age, and have been trying to work to figure out kind of the root cause of all of the things that I had going on. And that led me to my research in autism. And when I discovered autism and everything that came out of the research recently in the last 5 to 10 years. I dove into it, and I actually made autism one of my special interests. And I don't think I did anything 3 months, but research. My parents can vouch for that, and sleep or eat or anything. I was just diving into learning about myself and about other people and about my community. And I'm very passionate about sharing the information that I've gathered because it's incredibly important to me. And I think it's a huge defining part of who I am as a person.
Excellent. Well, we are interested. The voice, or the self-advocate voice, is one that we've done a lot to try and get more of on these webinars, because it does offer so much validity to the topics, as well as a lot of the nuance comes out, and that's what we're really looking for today. So we've got a short, it looks like, but broad agenda where we're going to be addressing common tensions, common experiences, and what everyone really looks for, the tools to navigate tensions, stressors. These are the strategies and the intervention strategies. So as we get started, I always have this big question. And Katy, I'm going to throw it over to you. Why is this an important topic right now?
So I think this is so important right now because as we start to hear more autistic people share their past experiences, their present experiences, there's a lot of new information for clinicians to consider when figuring out what goals should be and what interventions should be put in place. And I think families are also experiencing this same thing. There's a lot of new things that we're thinking about. And, navigating neurodivergent requires a lot of nuance. I mean, individuals feel differently about their diagnosis. They identify differently with it. There's a lot of thoughtfulness, openness, questioning, a lot of discussion that needs to happen between clinicians and the individuals they're supporting, between families and autistic people, between clinicians and families and autistic people. So it's really important that we're just recognizing that these are sometimes uncomfortable conversations, that they're nuanced conversations, that they're not black and white conversations, that there's not one right answer and one wrong answer. And I think the only way to do that is to have public conversations that talk about different perspectives in a respectful way, that we're open to hearing different perspectives and learning from each other. I think that is why this is such an important conversation to have now.
When we started this off, I said I wasn't going to ask both people to answer every single question because we would run out of time. But in this case, with your unique experience, Jane, why do you believe this is an important conversation? What does it mean to you to have this right now?
For me, it's very personal. I'm kind of living through this myself at the moment, being late diagnosed and trying to work with my family and work with the team of people that are helping support me. So it's incredibly applicable to my lived experience. And I think it's really important that I have the autistic voice in the room to be able to share that perspective as I go through it myself.
And I'll just jump and say one more thing, Matt, before you move us along, which is I have found as a clinician, so I do a lot of training and speaking. I train clinicians, I train teachers, I'm a parent coach, and I had the amazing experience of working with Jane to consult with me on one of my presentations that I do for the Sick Kids Center for Community Mental Health on training mental health professionals to be able to provide supports and services to the autistic community. And I learned so much. And so when I was in touch with Autism Ontario about doing some sort of webinar, I thought, I just want to bring the conversations that Jane and I had sort of behind the scenes to the public, because I think they're really fruitful and exciting. So.
No, that's great. I wasn't going to move on. I was going to ask, as I've said, I just met you guys last week, but you guys have known each other. Can you tell me a little bit about that? So you read my mind. Today we're going to talk about our learning objectives, if you would be empowerment through understanding, supporting neurodivergent individuals, and fostering collaboration. That is the goal of what we're going to try to achieve. And to get there, we are going to start with, I believe the first side of this is common tension. So, Katy, I'm going to let you speak to this first section. What are the common tensions that we need to be looking for?
So these are just some ideas that I sort of recognize as patterns and things that are coming up in my practice and working with this community. Obviously, there are probably more, but these are some themes that I'm thinking about regularly. So the first one is avoidance versus accommodation. So obviously accommodations are a huge part of how we support people who are experiencing mental health challenges, or autistic people, or people who have developmental disabilities. And finding that balance between, are we accommodating, or are we sort of avoiding stressors at the expense of skill building? And I think that this is a question that I'm always asking myself, that families are constantly trying to figure out. How far do we push? When do we stop pushing? And when are we accommodating in a way that's helpful? And when are we maybe not really accommodating, but avoiding? And there's not a black and white, right or wrong answer here. It's something that is a tension that we have to constantly be exploring. The next one is skill building versus things like masking, overcorrection, and shaming. And I'll talk about some of these terms a little bit more. So obviously, we want to help people build the skills they need to be able to have independence and autonomy, to be able to communicate, to be able to develop meaningful social relationships if they want to. These things all require skills. And teaching skills is wonderful. But that tension and balance between, are we teaching the right skills? Who are these skills benefiting? There's a lot of discussion now around masking, which is essentially hiding autistic traits in order to be accepted, or to appear a certain way, or to be able to feel safe and included. And so we want to ensure that therapy and skill building is not only about hiding autistic traits, but about building skills that autistic people need or want to have in order to be able to achieve the things that they want for themselves. Things like overcorrection and shaming sometimes are things that can sneak into skill building interventions. And we just really want to be able to look at that tension between, am I giving feedback, or am I overcorrecting, or am I shaming somebody? And being able to just think about that balance. Validation versus enabling. Are we validating someone's experience, or are we enabling behaviors that may be harmful to that person or to the community? And just being able to think about the tension that exists there. Which one am I doing? We're going to talk about tools for all of these things later on, so I'm not going to go into specific ways to address these tensions, but again, just explaining those broad themes. The next one is needs versus preferences. Being able to figure out what is a need, what is something that is a basic need for my mental health, well-being, physical health, and what is something that I simply prefer, and being able to navigate the tension there. Consistency versus flexibility. This is a big one. We know that part of autism is having, liking things to be similar, having special interests, really benefiting from routine and predictability. And at the same time, developing the skill of flexibility is also really, really important. So this tension that exists between how much consistency, routine, structure, predictability do we give, and how much do we support the development of flexibility through changing routines and, having more transitions and teaching new skills. And that it can be a really, really tricky one because, again, whenever we are learning a skill or building something new, it's uncomfortable. And trying to find that balance of, is this the good kind of discomfort that leads to growth, or is this the toxic kind of discomfort that leads to burnout? And then finally, my needs versus your needs. This is a big tension because different needs exist within families, within communities, within broader society. And how do we navigate it when people within a family have different needs? So, for example, perhaps an autistic child who has a need for a lot of physical input, and then a sibling or a parent who has a need for, in that moment, more physical space. And then what do we do when two people whose needs both matter are different from each other? And how do we navigate that tension? So these are some things that if you are an autistic person or you have an autistic child or you're a clinician, you may not have thought about them in this way, but these things might be coming up day to day when you're trying to make decisions or trying to interact with each other in ways that are positive and accepting and compassionate. So just to kind of list them out allows us to speak about them in a more structured way and then talk about tools that we can use to navigate them.
And there's a great infographic that covers this in the resource section. So I think it's the first one. So if you can go ahead and grab that. Questions are flying in, Katy. And I want to, we have questions about, how can families navigate this tension in an affirming, validating, compassionate way towards everyone, which I think kind of fits into my needs, your needs. Lots of questions around avoidance and accommodation. Do you want to answer those now, or do you want to wait till we get to the interventions where we're going to be talking about them down the road in the strategies?
I think I will. I think I will address, especially the avoidance versus accommodation thing. I have the avoidance versus accommodation test, and I'll really spell it out there. The other thing about being affirming, I think maybe I could speak to that a little bit right now, is that we can have boundaries, we can have expectations in a way that is affirming of someone's thoughts, feelings, perspective. We can go into those conversations with an open mind and listen to and give and make sure that there's input from the person who those boundaries and expectations are going to affect. And then we can do things in a way that's affirming by listening and then also by caring about that perspective, even if we're not going to, let's say, even if we're not going to go along with someone's preferences in that moment, or even if we are going to choose to prioritize a sibling needs over a different sibling's need, we can say, I see what you're feeling and I care about that. And right now, this is what we're doing. And I think that listening and seeing someone, believing them, caring about how they feel and what they're experiencing, when we may be setting a boundary or an expectation or having an interaction that is uncomfortable, difficult, or not preferred, is a way that we can be affirming in those more difficult moments. It's not about just never doing anything that is upsetting.
Right.
To people in your family, but we can be affirming while we may set boundaries or have expectations that the person might have different feelings about, that we can care about how they feel. We can see them in that moment.
All right. This is a great slide. The infographic's great too, guys. Make sure you grab it. But this is a great slide because from where I sit here, I see all the questions from our community coming in on these webinars. And I see them coming a lot from parents and other healthcare professionals. And these really do synthesize where we're seeing a lot of challenges. And no matter what we're talking about, it comes back to this. I'm curious, before we move on, because I've been seeing this as well in the professionals that I've been speaking to in the past year or the past, I guess, little bit, is some changes in philosophy around some of these. Can you speak to some of the, call it, what you've been seeing that have maybe been a change in philosophy from, say, 5 years ago as it relates to, any of these topics and any of the things that we find on this list?
Sure. I think that, at least from my experience as a clinician, one of the things that's being talked about and shared so much more is this idea of masking and how it can be harmful. And it's something that I started to think about a lot more. I think, so I'll even give an example. I used to work a lot with clients on likability, and I would just teach them like really specific ways to be more likable. And now it's not that I wouldn't necessarily do that direct work, but I would want to understand the client's values really well before I did any work around that, to make sure that I'm not just teaching someone that there's one way to be and this is what society expects of you and you have to do it this way or else, but more around, if you shared with me that you want to date or, that you want to make friends or that, no one's, you want to have play dates, but people aren't saying, yes, we can talk about ways, that may be aligned, skills you could learn that are aligned with your values. And then also talking about which situations do you want to put on that mask and which situations do you want to take it off, and making sure that we're not kind of pushing people to hide who they are entirely, but being able to use their likability skills or their social skills as a tool that they decide when to use them. And I think that is a big change that I've started to uncover that I've started to think more about lately as a clinician. And that is because there's so much discussion now and so much sharing around the experience of masking and how it's been harmful. So I kind of had to check myself a little bit there and integrate that into the way that I am doing, working, supporting my clients in that way. So I think the masking piece is probably an area that's really changed a lot lately, and that we're talking about it, we're thinking about it, and it's new information that we've had to integrate as clinicians into how we support our clients.
Definitely something that we can't go any session without talking about in some capacity, as it does impact folks so much. There is an article on masking in the resources, as if we knew this was going to come up. We didn't plan that one, but we did, and it's in there if you guys want to grab it and look at it. So those are the tensions. Now we want to move into common experiences. So Jane, this is for you. Can you talk a little bit about what's being conveyed in this slide and what are the common experiences?
Yeah, for sure. We'll start with the first one, intergenerational trauma. That's something that's been coming up a lot recently, very recently. And I think that just starting with a little bit of a definition, but basically just the passing down of trauma genetically, and it can alter gene expression. And autism is genetic and can be an inherently traumatic experience, and there's a good chance that can contribute to how a family functions. Overcorrection, protecting your children from trauma you may have experienced yourself as a neurodivergent person in a world that might not have been as accommodating or as accepting at the time. For meltdowns, another definition probably would be helpful, because I think with meltdowns, a lot of the time they can be a little bit misinterpreted or misdiagnosed as an anxiety attack, a panic attack, maybe a personality disorder or a mental health issue. It can be covered up quite a bit. I had quite a bit of panic attacks before realizing that they were autistic meltdowns. And another important thing to mention is that not everyone experiences those large motions the same way. A lot of the time, meltdowns is more of an external expression, whereas some people will experience that a lot more internally. And that term for that would be shutdown. But a lot of the same feelings, a lot of the same triggers. And the most important thing with that is working on meltdown preventions, working on meltdown recoveries, working on a concrete plan for when those do occur. And a really important thing to remember there is that meltdowns are an inherent part of the autistic experience. Meltdowns do not mean you've failed as a parent, that you have failed as an autistic person, and they're going to happen no matter what, even if you do all of the prevention in the world. And that's why it's really important to have that recovery plan so that you can be able to support the autistic person during the meltdown. Sensory seekers and avoiders. So a lot of the time, autistic people require more stimuli. Sometimes they require less stimuli. And that can be varying from autistic person to autistic person, but it can also kind of vary across neurodivergencies. For example, ADHD and autism can be a little bit incompatible in a way where ADHD, you can have a lot more need for that stimulation, vocal stimming and all that kind of stuff, whereas an autistic person may be a little bit more sensory avoidant. So it's important to make sure that you're accommodating all of the different sensory profiles that could be existing in one household. Safe spaces for autistic people, stim toys, headphones, glasses, a space for someone who has higher needs for stimulation to express themselves and feel comfortable in this way. And having both can be really difficult. I'm someone who has both autism and ADHD, and in that way, I have to find a balance of sensory stimuli and not being understimulated, and making sure that I'm also accommodating aspects that are sensory avoidant. I have a partner who is ADHD, and he dominantly will need a lot more stimuli than I do. That can be a little difficult to balance, but it's something that definitely needs to be a conversation. School refusal. I guess for school refusal, it's difficult for me to to comment on this as much because I am someone who school was a little bit different looking. I didn't go or attend school as often as the average person, but I did quite well academically, anyways. And that to me, I think brings up the issue of what part of that environment is being avoided. Is it a sensory issue that's being avoided? Is it a social issue that's being avoided? Is it an academic issue that's being avoided? And then working to accommodate those specific avoidances rather than just throwing out school altogether. I did want to kind of throw this to Katy a little bit as well. Like I said, I wasn't someone who attended school a lot, so it's something that I wanted her to be able to comment on as well. But just to wrap up there, one of the most important things that I discovered as an autistic person going through high school was that it's so important to have an advocate on your side, and that advocate being my mother. She was so pivotal to me getting through school, and she pushed and pushed and pushed for my accommodations and my needs, and really helped create a lot of education and awareness in that environment that is definitely needed. I mean, not all teachers and principals are going to have that education and that awareness of autism or neurodivergencies. And so it's kind of falls on the parent to be able to do that advocacy for your child.
But Kate, you want to jump in a bit on the
Sure.
on the school refusal side?
Yeah. I think that some of this, like the tools can come into it, but I will speak a little bit about it here. I think that what you said, Jane, around understanding which piece of school is being avoided and then making sure that we do think about how to support and accommodate whatever that specific challenge is, whether it's academic, whether it's social, whether it's sensory, whether it's all of them. And at the same time, when we're working with school refusal is often about avoiding the stressors that are presented during the school day, whether it's social, sensory, or academic. The problem is that if we avoid school altogether, we're often not able to get our basic needs met for some social connection, for getting outside, for overcoming challenge. All of these things bring well-being into our lives. And so one of the things that I often say to clients when I'm working with families is, it's my job, your parents' job, the school's job, and your job to work together to make sure that we understand the things about school that are hard and that we're accommodating you. And it's your job to show up and be willing to be uncomfortable sometimes and to push yourself sometimes. We're not going to go, often black and white thinking is a big part of how sometimes the autistic brain can think. It's like school is good or school is bad. And there are parts of school that are essential to well-being. And so it's about how do we address the parts of school that are hard and accommodate, whether that's, you're taking certain classes online and you're only in school for part of the day. That would be more of like a high school or a post-secondary education, that you have safe spaces there, these kinds of things. But, allowing you to stay home and play video games all day, not have social connections, not move your body, that's not good for you either. So yes, we understand, and this is the affirming piece, how hard it can be to be at school. And at the same time, here's the expectations and what accommodations do we need? And that's sort of the pieces of school refusal that I'm often looking at. And also, what are we avoiding? But also, if you are a parent whose child is avoiding school, what is competing with going to school? So if a child is not going to school, what is school can be tough and we want to accommodate there, but are video games available all day when we're not at school? Right. So being able to look at it from that perspective too. How do we need to accommodate? What is competing with attendance? How do we push, but not push too far? Again, the topic of this is tension and finding balance, because these aren't always easy answers, and it does require some thoughtfulness and openness. But those are sort of the buckets that we want to think about when we have a school refusal situation.
And that's the hardest part for parents, isn't it? Like that first point, right? The avoidance versus accommodation.
Yes.
And how much do we accommodate versus the like, and that's where as well. And I know we're gonna get to it, where I'm seeing some of the traditional beliefs change a bit. It's less about what are all the things we can do to have my child go to school, our children go to school 5 days a week and excel, more to what are the accommodations that we need. Even the way the school system operated through COVID and coming out of COVID were showing that this is how not only the school system is starting to work, but businesses are starting to work this way, where you can ask for go apply for a job at Amazon. You can ask for any accommodation you want, starting at the interview, not even, after you've been hired. Right. So, now we're going to move on, go back, Jane, to yourself. And as you get into this topic that we've already spent a good amount of time on, masking, an audience would like to know a little bit about your experience with masking versus skill building and mental health. So I know you've got some prepared remarks regarding masking, but if you could talk a little bit about that as well, your experience with masking versus skill building and mental health, that would be great for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. For masking, for me, it's been a little bit difficult, I guess, to kind of piece out who I am underneath all of the masks that I have built up. And then I'm still really learning how to unmask and what that looks like for myself. But I think it has been and will continue to be a key part of who I am as a person, and not something that I can fully separate from myself. There's something to be said about the safety of masking and the privilege of masking. It's not always something that everybody can afford to do. Is in work environments, in interactions with law enforcement. There are a lot of different cases in which an autistic person is quote unquote forced to mask for their safety and for their well-being. And it's not always, it's a privilege to be able to unmask and to be able to fully be myself in some spaces. And I'm hoping that the world is working to allow us to unmask a little bit more and create safer spaces for us to unmask more. But again, it's not always a possibility. So for me, it has allowed me to get through high school. It has allowed me to form social interactions. It has allowed me to hold jobs. But at the same time, there is that other piece, the dangerous piece of masking, and the toll that it takes on you. And from my specific experience, I masked for so long to the point where I drove myself to burnout. And it doesn't sound like much of a word, because neurotypical people do experience burnout as well. But for an autistic brain, burnout can be severely damaging. It can cause neurological changes. You can develop autoimmune disorders from it. I personally have experienced like a year of really bad health and physical health because of my feeling that need to mask and putting all of my energy into masking. It took quite a toll on me. And I think that's important to balance that safety aspect in that very real danger of having to mask all the time, and just how exhausting that can be on an autistic brain. And I think more specifically to my experience, I've found that a lot of women on the spectrum tend to feel the need to mask more, just due to female socialization in general. We're expected to be a certain way and show up a certain way and perform a certain way. And from a very young age, I was taught that I had to be something that I didn't feel like I was. And so it's important for me to learn where those values come from and kind of piece out my values from ones that have been shoved on me by society or by people from like my upbringing, doctors, teachers, etc.
You should that we did a webinar last month that was primarily on the female experience, and we dealt a lot about this. When I think about your experience being late diagnosed, making autism a special interest, where clearly in that process of investigation you would have learned what masking is, seen how you were doing it, and learned about the impact on you, did you struggle when you knew what it was doing, when you really knew what it was doing to you? Did you struggle still with unmasking? Did you worry that the benefits you had received from masking for so many years would go away? What was that like when you realized this is what I'm doing and this is what it's doing to me?
There was quite a bit of skill regression in discovering my mask and discovering how to unmask. I lost a lot of the skills, the social skills that I thought I had, and a lot of the abilities to do stuff that I was previously able to do. Like I said, it kind of coincided with that burnout and that skill regression from burnout as well for me. But I think that like understanding that it's something that I have to do, or it's going to eventually catch up to me in a way that I can't like work with anymore. It became imminent, I guess, to address the masking in a way where it was affecting my physical health and my mental health to the point where I was like, okay, I really need to work on this. And it was very difficult for me to take a step back from everything I was doing in my life. I'm very goal oriented, and I had this very clear vision of what I wanted for my future and when I was going to meet those goals and how I was going to meet those goals. And discovering I was autistic put a huge stop on that. And I really had to learn how to measure myself by a different stick and be okay with accepting that I might not be the person I thought I was going to be, and to try to redefine my goals based on what I knew and how I could handle them, and to really tell myself that it's not regression to focus on my health, that is priority. And if I can focus on my health and I can focus on unmasking, then I'll be better equipped to meet my goals that I wanted to meet, even if that means taking a few years from stepping back and taking a few years to reevaluate my goals and reevaluate my health.
So we could go on this topic all night, but we have a few more. But I think what would be very key for a lot of people to learn here, as they're hearing from you and seeing where you're at in your journey, is how long would you say that process took? You said there was regression, and now I know everything is a process and a journey, but from the point of where you were diagnosed and you started learning about this, would you say that whole breaking down and coming back up and understanding where it fits was a year, 2 years? What would you say?
I would say it took me about a year, and I would say I'm still in the midst of that process, really. After discovering I was autistic, it everything in my life felt like it had changed. Everything in my life felt like I was seeing it through a different lens. School and work and my relationships, and so for me, it happened almost instantaneously, where everything just kind of shifted. It's so hard once you've discovered that to go back to the old way of thinking. But the coming to terms with it took significantly longer for me. And honestly, I'm still working on coming to terms with it. I still have that little neurotypical voice in the back of my head that says, you're behind and you need to catch up and all those things. And it's an ongoing battle with me with that acceptance work, that I am not going to be on the same path as everyone else. It's going to look a little bit different, and it's going to be difficult to accept that. And I'm still working on that now, I would say.
Okay. Keep the questions coming, guys.
Can I jump in with just a really concrete idea for parents, maybe too, and clinicians, just because you just made me think about something that came to my mind? I think that, and Jane, tell me what you think about this. What if we taught masking as a skill or a set of tools that you could choose to put on when it serves you and take off when it doesn't, versus creating this mask that almost masking should not be your identity, right? We don't want to teach people. So for example, like if I'm teaching social skills to a client, I don't want them to think that they should feel a certain way or they should be a certain way. But if you want to accomplish this goal, here are some ways that you could do that. And I think that if we could, because the truth is, to a certain extent, and not to the extent that autistic people have to, we all have to mask and do mask. We all present a version of ourselves to society that, may not be 100% authentic. But I think when you go to therapy and we don't want our therapy to be teaching them to identify to be neurotypical, and that should be the goal. So a mask should not be someone's identity. It should be a set of skills and tools that they can use in service of what matters to them to service their own identity, their own goals. And so I think if we can think of it like that, there should be more distinction between this is a skill you can use in service of bettering your life and furthering your own goals versus this is who you should be. This is how you should think. This is how you should act. And I think that is a great way to navigate this balance.
Yeah. And I think that it's that, like you said, it's very important in certain situations to be able to have those skills, in job situations, in school situations. But something that was kind of in the back of my mind while you were saying that was, it's so important to create a space at home where that person feels like they are fully able to unmask. For me, I felt the need to mask at school all the time, and I would get such good feedback from my teachers and my peers. She's so good. She's so quiet. She does great in school. I'd come home and it would be like a shaken up pop bottle. I would erupt all over my family. I was in a horrible mood. I would just feel terrible. And they'd be like, why are you like this here? And as soon as you come home, it's just like, you're just terrible, quote unquote. And it took me a really long time to realize that it's because I was holding all of that down all day. I didn't feel like I had the ability to express myself, and I needed a space, an environment that I felt safe being myself in. And that's why it's so important as a caregiver to be able to create that environment for the autistic person at home where they are fully able to be themselves. And that's why it's so important to not have that overcorrection and that shaming coming from parents and coming from home, because if you feel like you have nowhere to unmask, you have nowhere to be yourself, it can really, really build up.
Right. And for parents who see the meltdowns, as we discussed earlier, at home, but the teachers are like, we don't see that, or their coach is like, we don't see that. And it could even be, I've learned recently, one parent and not the other. I think it comes down to where you feel safe, right? Where you feel like you can do that.
Absolutely.
Good transition now into sibling needs. I'm gonna give you a little bit of leeway to get through this, so we can move on to some strategies. But don't worry, guys, we're gonna get to your questions too.
Yeah, sibling needs. I think it's really important to understand. It was mentioned in the previous slide, needs versus preferences. What is inherently a need that this person they need to function, they need to feel happy, they need to feel healthy. And what is something that maybe could be put off to the side because it's something that is a preference. The other thing that's important to mention is like last child effect. When you have a child who maybe requires a lot more attention, a lot more help, a lot more accommodation, that can leave another sibling feeling very neglected, even though it makes perfect sense to an adult brain that, this person obviously requires more attention, requires more help, requires more of my time. That can feel very, very neglecting to the brain of a child, and it's always important to make sure that you are validating and understanding the needs of all children in the family so that one of them doesn't feel neglected or left out. And I think to do that, you need a concrete plan of everyone's needs and preferences in a household and how those interact with each other, how possibly those could contradict each other, and really having that concrete, maybe even written down conversation of how those sibling needs interact with the needs of maybe other neurodivergent children in the household, and how they play off of each other. For parents discovering they may be neurodivergent, kind of that co-occurring discovery when their child is diagnosed. I think that this is something that has been really, really applicable to my experience at the moment. And it's something that has been a huge conversation in my family. My father is also autistic, and he only realized that after I was diagnosed, because for the longest time it was, well, I do that, so that seems completely normal. And then that seems very familiar. And the gears start turning and you realize, okay, maybe this is where that comes from. And it is a genetic condition. So it makes sense that one or more parents in a household may also discover that they are neurodivergent while their child is getting diagnosed. And it's really hard. And my dad has commented on this when you are at that age to learn how to separate that mask from yourself. And he's commented on like he really needed to dig back into his past, into his childhood to understand his autistic self, because over time there was so much he had masked away. He had overcorrected away to the point where he's like, oh, well, I don't do that. But then he'd think back to it and he did do that. You just kind of grew out of it in a way because at the time society was not really accommodating to those things. The other really important thing with that is it's very difficult to have that self-discovery journey alongside your child and still be the support for them. Because just as much as it's a huge life shift for your child to discover they're autistic, it's huge for a parent to discover that they're autistic. Probably even bigger because you've had careers at this point. You've had a family at this point. There's so many life decisions that you've made and gone through without knowing these things about yourself. And that discovery journey can be really, really difficult to go through and still offer support for your child. So it's important to understand not only co-regulation with your kid, but self-regulation, learning skills for yourself so that you can help build skills for your child at the same time. And that leads me into parental stress, the healthy coping mechanisms and co-regulation for parents is just as important as it is for their children. And I always tell my parents this, if you're not healthy, you can't help me be healthy. It's just as important for autistic parents, neurotypical parents, to get the help that they need, to seek the counseling that they need, to build the skill sets they need, the emotional regulation that they need to be able to demonstrate that back to their kids, to be able to be that support for their kids. So it's so important to prioritize your own health and your own discovery and your own journey, as well as being there to support your child, because that's where they get that information. That's where they have that reference. But I did want to throw it to Katy a bit on the kind of co-occurring discovery, the parents discovering that they're also diagnosed when their children's diagnosed. She wants to make a comment.
Sure, I can definitely jump in there. So I think something that might be helpful to explore a little bit here is that when you struggle in a similar way to your child, there's often two sort of extremes that we can go to. And we know that the autistic brain can sort of live in this black and white realm. So I can just even comment on two patterns that I see emerge within families in this situation. One is where we have the parent who identifies so strongly with their child's suffering that they are so scared of their child experiencing the suffering that they did that we get into a lot of avoidance patterns where it's me and you and, I'm going to save you from everything and I'm not going to push you and I'm not going to allow for resilience to be built. It's not just I'm going to be here to support you on your journey, but I am going to save you from your journey. You don't have to go to school. You don't have to. So that is a pattern out of love and compassion that I see. And I see this a lot too with anxiety disorder. So even outside of autism, but parents who struggle with anxiety themselves, often there's a lot of those avoidance patterns that happen in the family. The parent trying to protect their child from having to do things that make them anxious, which then doesn't allow for the skills around, distress tolerance and overcoming anxiety in service of things that matter to you. So that pattern can emerge where that deep protector in a way that ends up doing things like enabling or avoidance that are harmful to everybody in the family. And on the flip side, we have a different way of protecting. I am so aware of your struggle and I'm going to protect you from it by being very hard on you. And by, you need to learn these skills and you need to learn it this way, because if you don't, there's a big bad world out there that's going to hurt you. And I had to learn them and you have to learn them. Right. And then there's this sort of rigidity around it, sometimes applying your very own experience and your own coping ways of coping to how your child's experience is and how they should cope. And flexibility is something that, we all probably need to work on, but it can be particularly difficult for the autistic brain. And so sometimes I really am trying to support families in finding that balance of if they are going through that discovery of, maybe I'm autistic, or maybe they do have a diagnosis, of being able, as Jane said, to reflect on their own experience, to take care of themselves, to take care of their mental health, to be open to the fact that their child's experience might be different, that the ways of coping might need to be different, and also just recognizing if there's patterns of avoidance and enabling or patterns of overcorrecting and shaming as a way to compensate for that fear of your child suffering. So I just bring that up if there's anyone who's listening who may identify with either of those two sort of extremes there that going through that self-discovery might bring you to. And often there's a lot of skills that need to be learned alongside your child, and that can be difficult.
Yeah, and just to briefly elaborate on something that you mentioned there was the idea that the autistic person that you may be looking after, while you do relate to them in some ways, they're a different person, and they're going to have different needs, and they're going to have a different experience. And while you are going to be able to see a lot of similar experiences in your child, you really need to remember that they're different people, and they have different needs, and they may have different values than you. And it's important because I hear a lot of the time, well, I was able to do it, so you should be able to as well. And it's important to remember that, well, you are a representation of maybe an autistic person who has made it to that point in life. Not everybody that was part of your generation did. And some people struggled in different ways. And those people did slip through the cracks, and those people didn't make it. And it is really important to recognize that there are different sets of needs. And while something that might have worked for you, it might not necessarily work for your autistic child, and they may struggle in different areas than you.
And often we look back at struggle when we're older and have been through it, and we think of it as this character building, but we can forget just how hard it was. And if we can make it just that much easier, we should. And we need to. It's a different world now than it was when even I grew up. And so, these things are important. Guys, conversation's been great, but we got to get to the tools. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make you guys primary. We're going to keep the questions for the very end, and we're going to let you guys dive into this to provide the tools to navigate tensions and stressors.
Okay, great. So I'll just speak to some of these in a more process way and be a little bit more general. I think that flexibility is one of the most important tools we have to navigate these stressors, recognizing that there's going to be an ongoing conversation, and we need to be flexible in the way that we think and act. So knowing what is important to your family, to you as a parent, to your child, knowing their values, knowing your values, and being willing to be flexible in the route that we get. So I'll even give a very specific example. Working with a child right now who the parents really want him to go to summer camp. They believe it could be a really great learning opportunity for him, which can be an amazing experience for a lot of children. So I was able to have them reflect on, what is it about summer camp that is a value to you? And we kind of came down to social connection, being outside, moving your body, and autonomy. And so I was able to say, okay, if summer camp isn't something that we're ready for yet, what is a different set of activities we could be doing this summer that accomplishes those values and accomplishes that goal? We can do the same thing with school. So being flexible about how we reach our goals and how we behave in service of our values is a really important way to navigate stress and those tensions between, should we push for overnight camp? Should we not? Coming back to values. What is the value behind the thing that we're pushing, and how are there different ways, and is there a multitude of ways that we could explore reaching that goal? The other piece is validation, and I spoke a little bit about this originally, in that when we need to do those hard things, because life is difficult and stress is a part of learning and it's a part of growing, and we should not be scared of it. I think that that's a trend that I have a lot of concerns about today is, when we talk about masking, when we talk about making sure that there's safe spaces, when we talk about accommodation, that is essential. And it is also essential that we don't totally drop everything. So when we do need to have tough conversations or have expectations or boundaries that may cause some discomfort, can we do that with a lot of validation and understanding? Can we see the person? I know that you're exhausted today and that you're really not ready to do homework yet. Homework needs to get done before screen time. You can decide when you want to do it. But, I'm not going to let you veg out and just, numb out tonight, because then I know that you're not going to do something that's really important. So being able to deliver those boundaries and expectations with validation is really a great way to navigate some of this. The accommodations versus avoidance tests, I'm always asking myself, is this goal? Accommodations should increase participation and inclusion and the ability to partake in activities that are important to the person and allow us to live more fully by our values. It allows us to participate more in what is important, and it increases opportunities to build skills and grow. And avoidance reduces opportunities for participation, for inclusion, and it reduces opportunities for skill building. So, for example, not going to school, we are not able to participate in things that matter and that we need. And it does not provide opportunities for skill building. So an accommodation, let's say, where there's a safe space within the school for the student, or they're taking some of their classes online, they are able to participate in the things that matter to them more fully because of the accommodation, and they have opportunities to build skills. So that's sort of the test. Am I improving participation, and am I increasing opportunities for learning, or are we doing the opposite? That's what happens with avoidance. And then really being able to, like Jane said, have conversations. What are your feelings? What are your needs? Let's communicate that. Obviously, the ability for, the autistic community is very varied, and communication can differ so much. But when you're able to really be able to talk about what everybody's needs are and making a plan to have, to compromise, essentially, which is really how we manage different needs, is through compromise. Being able to, like I said, when we talked about flexibility, be in touch with what your values are, what your child's values are, and being able to see how they may be different, and then thinking about how we can flexibly approach each other's values. And then the skill building and overcorrection is really the same thing. So skill building will give that person a way to do what is important to them, and overcorrection really just squashes confidence. It damages relationships, and we actually don't learn from it. We kind of shrink when we experience it. So that's a great way to sort of ask yourself, am I teaching a skill that allows my child, or am I learning a skill that allows me to have more of what I want for myself? Or am I trying to be neurotypical? Am I trying to fit into a box that I don't fit into, and that's going to harm me? So it really comes down to what's helpful versus unhelpful.
Right. Which makes total sense, but you really simplified it here into a way of kind of looking at those challenges. But it's not easy. So, I mean, is this like a cue card that you teach parents and caregivers to have in front of them? How would you suggest that our audience take this and kind of put these ideas into action?
Jane, do you want to share something that your family has done along this route that kind of would talk about and integrate some of these tools, and how you addressed a specific tension or experience in your family using some of these things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the important thing to mention is having that really concrete plan, having it maybe even like written out, posted somewhere, communal in the household, to be able to refer back to it, because we can't always rely on our brains to remember everything, and it's really difficult to, in those high stress situations, be able to have the correct skills to fall back on. For me and in my family, that really comes down to like breaking things down bit by bit, step by step, and in really making those concrete plans of action. And not only that, but mapping out how things in the past have gone and how we can improve in the future by dissecting and mapping out those occurrences.
Okay, so we got a question that I want to get to, but we're at the end of our time. So for our audience members who have to go, I apologize. Please take the survey before you do go. And for those who can stay with us, I'm just going to ask this one question because I think it's interesting. There's so many great questions here, guys. We're definitely going to need to have you back. But we have a question here. My partner is autistic and I want to marry her. I've been looking for advice on how to be patient with autism and have a fully committed relationship. How can I be a better partner to her? Not only is it a great question, it's a very sweet one. I'll throw it over to you guys for some suggestions about that.
Jane, do you want to start?
Yeah, for sure. I really like this question. And I think it's really great that you're asking questions already. I think that's the right step in the direction already. If you're asking questions and if you're attending this webinar and you're really willing to learn. And I think that's the most important thing, is that willingness to learn and to understand that every autistic person is going to have a different set of needs. And that there's always going to be need, like that ongoing conversation, especially to further that understanding, especially if you are autistic yourself and you don't inherently get some of the aspects of your partner. It's going to be important to have those conversations and explaining how things may be affecting this person and vice versa. For me and my partner, one of the most important things that he does for me is having those conversations on a very regular basis. Whenever there's a tension that comes up in the relationship or a tension that comes up in my life, he gives me a space that I feel I'm able to fully articulate and express myself and have that understanding and that validation. I think that's really one of the most important things, is to just have empathy and to have that understanding, even if you cannot fully relate to an autistic person's experiences, to be able to give them that space where they feel heard and they feel understood and they feel supported, is one of the most valuable things that you can do. And if you're going to be doing research, it's really important to remember that not all autistic people can be painted with one brush. We're not a monolith. And the most important research is going to come right from the horse's mouth, and to just continue to have those conversations and continue to be empathetic, continue to be compassionate, and to continue to discuss every time there are those tensions that come up.
Can I jump in with like a really concrete thing too? So 2 things that I would say, and I think this is important for all caregivers, but be concrete about what you need. So like when you're interacting with your partner, being able to say, like, just saying how you feel, for example, might not be enough to give your partner who is autistic enough information to be able to meet your needs. So it's so important to be concrete. Like, I need you to do, like, once you have listened and heard and understood their perspective, okay, so here's how I'm feeling, and I need you to do X. How would you feel about that? Let's talk about it. So being very concrete about what it is that you need from your end of the relationship, so that they can actually meet that need. Because if you are too abstract, it may be difficult for an autistic person to meet your need. And then the other thing that I just want to say for parents and for partners is that everything that we're talking about is not at the expense of your own needs and your own feelings and your own perspective. So because you have a child or a partner who is autistic and may be experiencing suffering as a result of masking, as a result of being overstimulated or sensory issues, that does not mean that you have to sacrifice your own needs and over theirs 100% of the time. That's not good for anybody. It is okay to have boundaries with compassion, with understanding. It is okay to have expectations, and that's really important. And so I don't want us to become unbalanced. I am so thrilled that that autistic voices are being heard. It is essential, and we need to listen, but we also have voices that we need to listen to as well. And that's where we do find balance, right? You don't want to become a martyr and sacrifice everything that matters to you, or that your own mental health, like allowing your child to, hit you or keep you up all night, or, not having your physical boundaries met. It is okay to have needs yourself. Sometimes we compromise, and that's essential and beautiful and something you can give to your child, but it is also okay meet in that middle of, I'm going to do a little suffering, you're going to do a little suffering, and that's part of how we love each other, and that's part of how we are a family. So I just think that's a really important thing to say.
Yeah, being direct, not expecting them to read between the lines is something that you touched on there. Being very direct is really important with that. It's not always that we don't want to accommodate your needs or to make you feel good. It's really just about that we don't understand how, or that you've asked that. And it's more difficult for us to read between the lines of a relationship. So being very direct with what you need and being very concrete with what you need is super important. And also remembering that us being stressed, us having meltdowns is not a reflection of you and your failure. And to just have that space where, like, an example of that is, for me, I am really stressed in cars. They're very overstimulating. I'm very anxious on every single car ride that I'm on, and my partner understands that. And so for me, I can be very, very stressed and very, very heightened in a car, and he knows never to take that personally, because we've had that discussion where I'm not angry at you. I am just having a very heightened situation. And so it really helps with, like, again, not taking those things personally, and just understanding where that stress comes from.
Well, both, I learned a lot tonight, and I know our audience did too, based around the comments that I'm seeing. The passion shines through, and I know we could go for another hour, but unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. Katy and Jane, I want to thank you guys so much for the time tonight, for your insights and everything that you shared with us. To our audience, as I mentioned, please complete the survey. You should see it on your screen right now before you leave the session. Also, this event will be available on demand tomorrow at this link and at the Autism Ontario website. Please share it with anyone you think who may benefit from this content. The more people we have through these sessions, the more of these we can put on for you. I promised you when we met the first time I would give this to you. Before we go, is there anything that you hope your audience takes away? Any parting messages for our audience? Jane, I'll start with you.
Yeah, the one thing I hope you can take away is that we are really starting to advance in these conversations and starting to learn so much more from the autistic community. I really hope that I've helped shed some light on maybe the inner workings of the autistic brain and how that can help with clinicians and help with families and help with partners. And I'm just very grateful to have been able to have the opportunity to be the voice for some people who maybe haven't had the opportunity to have this articulation in the past. And I'm so thankful that we are finally starting to have these conversations.
Katy?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think these conversations are so important. And I think what I would want to leave anyone who's listening with is that these are hard conversations, and they are difficult questions that are ongoing. And so obviously that's challenging. And you're not failing that you have to keep having them. And it is stressful to have input from so many places and different voices and different clinicians and your feelings and your child's. And I just want to empathize. That's really hard. And it's part of this process, that you're not alone in that. And that if you are having these conversations and you are thinking about finding balance and you are thinking about those tensions, you're already getting it right, because there isn't really a right or wrong. It's about being open to exploring what is right and wrong right here, right now, for you, for your child, for your family. And that's a process that will be ongoing. So I think those would be my final thoughts. Thank you so much for providing a platform for us to have this talk. And thank you to Jane for sharing your brain with me. It's helped me in my clinical work. It's helped me with my presentation. So I'm grateful to you. So I want to say that too.
Well, we're grateful for you guys. It was great. We'll be sure to have you back. To our audience, thanks so much for your participation and for sticking around with us as we kept going. And we look forward to seeing all of you at our next Autism Ontario event.
Thanks, everybody.